Okay. So as Brian mentioned at the start, I am Maureen Kola. I am leading an initiative called Alberta's Electricity Future as part of the Energy Futures Lab. Our fundamental belief is that a future system needs to put people and businesses at the center of it, unlike our current electricity system does. We are taking a social innovation approach to do this, to ensure that all voices are heard, and that hopefully we will end up with a resilient electricity grid along with a few other key principles that are needed. So to kick off the discussion, maybe I'll start with you, Robert. You could just give a few minutes, introduce yourself, and say a few words.
Thank you. I'm Robert Tremblay. I'm the policy manager at Energy Storage Canada. So Energy Storage Canada, we're the national trade association focused exclusively on advancing energy storage. We have members from across the value chain, manufacturers, suppliers, all the way to developers and utilities. Batteries are the main sort of storage investment we're seeing now, but we're all passionately technology agnostic and support the advancement of all kinds of energy storage technologies, from flywheels to flow batteries. We work to ensure energy storage is a key focus for policy and decision makers across Canada, creating flexible, sustainable, and affordable electricity grid. So getting on to the topic of resilience, I think we're embarking into an uncertain and dynamic and likely chaotic future. This is due to both the physical effects of climate change, in addition to the energy transition, which in part aims to mitigate climate change. Energy storage, of all technologies, durations, and scales is going to be a vital part to creating an energy resilient future. So as far as some examples of where storage can play a role, I think storage as a non-wires alternative is a really exciting role I see for us. So near both generation and load, so we see hybrids being deployed, and I think we'll start to see storage at parts of the grid where there's congestion near generation, but also near load centers. So maybe customer sited or close to different loads where we can be shaving peaks and making sure that we're tracking where demand is without having too much of a lag time and being able to meet it. I think, of course, storage as backup power for critical loads as well. And storage can provide a lot more than just energy and capacity. Looking at value stacking and ancillary services, so that says frequency support, voltage support, and fast ramping. And then finally, I think storage can provide resilience on price. So in Alberta, we've had a recent pretty dramatic spike in electricity prices. The study commissioned by Energy Storage Canada and CNREA found that just 300 megawatts of storage enabled via some policy tweaks to be able to pursue our energy arbitrage in the Alberta market would have saved electricity customers over $600 million just in 2022. So I think energy storage can play a role providing resilience across a variety of vectors. One other thing I'll say is, I think storage, I just want to convey that storage goes with everything. So, I think renewables and storage are obviously a great pair, but storage has a role that's beyond just working with renewables. So of course, I mentioned ancillary services already, but I think, pairing with resources that we don't ordinarily think of. I was pleased to hear someone mention yesterday about pairing storage with nuclear. So, traditional baseload resources, while they are very reliable, are not necessarily flexible, which is an attribute I think we're going to increasingly need in the future system, especially getting back to resiliency. So storage paired with those resources can help provide fast ramping and just ability to ramp period to some of those resources. And even natural gas, in Alberta we see storage already paired with natural gas peaker, which allows that peaker to have, again, faster response time, but also to be able to spin completely down and have enough time to start up when it's needed. So in summary, I think we're going to uncertain times with both physical and economic risks. Flexibility, especially in the face of adversity, is going to be an essential attribute to any future electricity system. Energy storage is going to be a key means of achieving that flexibility on scales from microseconds to seasons, from microgrids all the way up to the macro grid. And I'm not so biased to say that storage is all we're going to need to provide that flexibility. I think diversity is another aspect of resilience. So transmission, demand side management, DERs, and just other flexible clean capacity is all going to be needed as well. But storage will and is already playing a big role. And I'm excited to see where our sector is going to go as we face ever-growing need for what we can provide. Thanks.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Owen Lewis, and I'm from Montserrat. I work for the Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI. RMI is a not-for-profit American organization whose goal is global energy transition. I work within the Global South. The Global South consists of 3 geographic locations: islands, which is the Caribbean, where I'm from, Southeast Asia, and Africa. And those 3 developing economies, RMI's goal is to make sure that we have sustainable energy in those, and helping government, utilities, and the regulators work together in terms of achieving that goal. The Islands Energy Program and the whole Global South is based on 3 pillars: planning, integrated resource and resilient planning. And a lot of people think that RMI's greatest contribution is actually going into these areas and actually showing the people how to do a resource plan. That is important, but the greatest value was actually achieving collaboration between governments, utilities, and the regulators, and getting them to engage with the population, not at the end of the process, but at the beginning and throughout. That has been the greatest accomplishment in terms of the whole planning, because this is so long-term. And if we are going to achieve the accomplishments, we have to change the minds of the populations in how we consume and use energy. And if we are only talking to them at the end of the process and not engaging with them during the process, it's going to be a lot harder for us to accomplish those goals. The second pillar is projects, and that's the area of my specialty. So project development, project management, consisting of de-risking projects, procurement, contract administration. It's going in, and a lot of times that first project that the government or the utility is going to do in terms of a renewable project, actually working with them and the assigned team. Throughout the Caribbean, a lot of people talk about capacities. The capacity is there within the utility and the government a lot of times. The greatest problem is not capacity, actually, it's availability. You have a job where it asks you to work 60 hours a week, and then you get assigned a project which adds another 30 hours a week. You have to decide what it is that you're going to spend that time a week, or are you going to have a 90-hour week? So the capacity, the availability and capacity has to do with ensuring that organizations learn that a reasonable work week is X number of hours, and therefore we need to prioritize. Is staff going to be dedicated to the project, X amount of hours, and other work, the balance in terms of doing that? And the last part is knowledge transfer or capacity building. We heard that a lot yesterday in terms of our panels. And we do that through 3 main projects. One, as we are working, we always have local teams working side by side with us, being engaged with us, developing the products with us, learning by doing. The other thing is that we've set up 2 learning programs. The first one, ETA, Energy Transition Academy, and where professionals from government, from the utility, from the regulators actually go through a design program. And the last bit is RMI's solution to that capacity availability problem that the islands in particular have, where RMI has gone out and created a program called CFARM. And CFARM is, we will go into the island and we will hire someone local to actually work a lot of times with the Ministry of Finance to try and secure capital funding for the projects. Because RMI is now convinced that bringing in consultants and the consultant coming in, spending time and going back is not giving us the kind of purchase that we need in order to accelerate the energy transition. So the Islands Energy Program makes up of about 20 staff, of which 8 of us are from the islands, like myself. I work My office is at home in Montserrat, as 7 of my other colleagues in different islands. We've got colleagues in St. Vincent, Dominica, Trinidad and Tobago, Anguilla, working on our program. And the whole idea of RMI in terms of the Island Energy Program and its own Global South is that with time, we get sustainability because the professionals that are going to be developed are going to be local, going to be regional, and they're the ones that are going to be doing the work in the future. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning again, everyone. Danse. Again, thank you for being allowed to sit on this platform. I think a lot about these type of things in regards to these discussions we can have, especially as an Indigenous person. When we work toward the betterment of this country and the betterment of Turtle Island, we got to find ways of working in partnership and collaboration, whether it's Indigenous people, Métis, or Inuit. When I think about the treaties and talk about the treaties, I'm not talking about the Indigenous component of the treaties. I'm talking about the understanding of what the intent of the treaties mean for the country and Canadian citizens alike. Within a treaty, there's a lot of human rights that pertain to the treaties that include housing, education, and health. And these things are very important components of the treaty, but more importantly, the understanding of this next 7 generations that ingrained in the treaty, that we need to work in regards to creating sustainability, a comfort for those next generations to flourish. I always believe that the treaties and intent of what they mean is not what doing now, but what the legacy that you can leave behind for those future generations to flourish. I also, when we think about those treaties, for me, when I think about them, that's a huge important component for me in that understanding that we can work together. We don't need to find an agreement. We don't need to create anything new. Something was already built there over almost 150 years ago, through our ancestors and the government at the time. So when I look at the treaties also as an Indigenous component, I don't think of it as this belongs only to Indigenous people. The treaties and intent of what they were written for belongs to everybody within this country, everybody that lives in these treaties. There should be no reason why, as Canadian citizens, you should have that ability to have that component accessibility to treaty rights. The treaty right to health, the treaty right to housing, the treaty right to education. These are fundamentally human rights that you should have that accessibility to, that are protected under this agreement. So I'm hoping in the future when we have these discussions, that discussions can actually include the understanding of what it means to be a Canadian treaty citizen. So I'm hoping, when we look at that understanding of what the treaty is, it's written right there over almost 150 years ago, to work together, to create sustainability, to build partnership, to develop this country to the best way it could be, with the understanding of knowing that we want to care for each other. Also, when I had this, when we think about energy also, I think about how everything is interconnected. When we talk about energy, we're not talking only about utilities, how energy is cultivated, how it's actually distributed. We got to think about the other things too, of how everything is interconnected. How do we get that food to get energy to get through the day? How do we get that fuel to the vehicle, or that battery to the vehicle? How do we get electricity to these lights? Who does the work to actually get these type of construction built? So everything is connected through energy, I believe. Even how we are made through atoms is a portion of energy. So for me, when we look at energy, we got to look at it through a different lens, that everything is interconnected, and actually has to have that understanding that we're not talking about energy as consuming for utilities, but energy as a whole, as we are individually, or else as a community, or else as a country. So again, I thank you for allowing me to be up here. Hi.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to kick us off with some questions, but I do want to throw it out to the floor that we will take questions throughout. This timer is not correct, just guys, so we've got about 35 minutes left. So Anouk, will you go around with a microphone? So if you've got a question, just feel free to raise your hand, and we'll get you tied in here as well. So I thought one of the important things that we could start with, especially because Anouk had brought this up around terminology at the start of the day yesterday. And so I always feel like there's 2 words that are thrown around: reliability and resiliency. And so I'd like to throw it out there from each of you if you want to answer this. What is the difference between those two concepts from your perspective? Robert, can I throw it to you to begin?
Sure, yeah. So I think, I just kind of thinking about it, I think reliability is probably a subset of resiliency and something that we already prioritize quite a bit in our industry. But I think, just providing and making sure that we don't have outages is really the bare minimum. I think we need to be thinking about, what kind of conditions are we going to be in the future, and what kind of investments are we going to need to accommodate to do the things that we're trying to do, such as achieve a net zero grid, or even more broadly a net zero economy. So I think when we're talking about resilience, I think it really has an aspect of planning to it that I think reliability doesn't quite as much, or at least maybe in longer timescales than reliability does. I think as well, in the kind of intro blurb to this, we talked about resilience being the ability to handle disruptions. I think the timescales of the disruptions are interesting as well, where I think in the past we could forecast low growth with reasonable certainty, but now we're facing growth in kind of spurts and different kind of timescales than we would have thought, and growth in new kinds of generation, different times than we would have thought. So I think a lot of it as well is about forecasting as well.
Okay.
So from the island's perspective, we look at reliability as a component of resilience. For us, resilience is a necessity. And the island context, why that is a necessity, is two main reasons. One, unlike yourself here in North America, there's not going to be any interconnection between any island nation and another island nation for the foreseeable future. So that's not an option for us. And the second option, the second reason is that resources are very scarce and precious for the islands. And when you get capital resources, we can't afford to fail. If we get a project within the islands and that project is unsuccessful, the donor community branch-wide knows about it, and it makes it so much more difficult to get another project funded. So because of those realities, resilience is always in the forefront. A lot of people don't say the word resilient, but in terms of our approach to project, it is innate, intimate to what we do. So from a project perspective, which is my area of expertise, people say, what does resilience have to do? If you ask someone in the Caribbean, they'll tell you the number one factor is regulation. And why? Because all of us know, because politics in Canada is no different from politics in the Caribbean, the politicians change, and with each different politician, their policies and area of interest change. Regulations don't guarantee that your area gets priority. What regulation does is make it more likely to be able to convince the next set of politicians when they come in that this is worth supporting. So regulation is the first when we are talking about resilience within the Caribbean. The second one has to do with the business case. And we all know that the business case is about need and about economics. But for resilience from an island perspective, we're talking about specifics. So what do we mean by that? So we're doing a new solar project, and someone will say, okay, what's the capacity of that project? And 250 kilowatts. That's good. But what's better would be a 250 kilowatt project that will produce 285,000 kilowatt hours of energy annually. Getting more specific help you in terms of resilience. And the last metric from a business perspective in terms of resilience is reporting, mandating reporting. It is amazing when you are mandated to report certain metrics, how the team gets motivated to make sure that you do a good job in the first place so that you don't end up with that pig, as Loretta told us yesterday in Jamaica. No one wants that pig in their office. and reporting metrics is a way of accomplishing that. The other thing is professional and experienced advice. Because we can't afford to fail, we need professional advice. So the RMIs of the world, the NRELs of the world, experienced EPC contractors that know the industry. You need to bring them in. I got a call about 2 weeks ago from a client in one of the other countries asking for some help. And after describing the situation, I asked, okay, what's the position of your client engineer? He said, we didn't hire a client engineer. So I said, who was looking out for you? And that was the problem. They did not, and the contractor realized that they did not have that professional experience and was taking advantage of them. So we need professional, experienced people. We also need fit-for-purpose design and specification. A lot of people think of resilience, they think from that technical perspective in terms of the specification. The one thing I will tell you in terms of specification from our perspective in the Caribbean, we talk about hurricane categories, so Cat 1, Cat 2, 3, 4, and 5. And in the early days, 8 years ago, when we were doing these first projects, we would say, we expect this project to Cat 3. Now, those categories is a range. There's a low range and there's a high range. So the contractor automatically thinks low range. The client automatically thinks high range. And there's a major difference, and then expectations are different, conflicts come up. So what we are saying in terms of specification, RMI in the last 4 years within the Caribbean says, don't use the general hurricane categorization. Be very specific in terms of the design wind load. So in the last 4 years, all the projects that RMI have worked on within the Caribbean have been designed to 180 miles per hour in terms of design wind loads. One, it creates a level playing field when you go out to the market, and two, you're comparing apples with apples when you're doing the evaluation. The other part of design I would like to explain was a project in Montserrat, from an example, how resilient. So we got a project in 2019 funded by the European Union for 1 megawatt of solar with batteries. We had never done a renewable energy project, so in the design of the project, we decided to do the project in phases. So we divided it into phase 1, 250 kilowatts of rooftop solar PV connected directly to the bus bar from the power station roof and 2 adjacent roofs, phase 1. Phase 2, 750 kilowatts of ground-mounted solar PV with 1.1 megawatts of battery located 1.5 miles away. So in the design, we got 2 phases. We learned in phase 1 a little bit more about doing the work that we could have applied in phase 2. The fact that we used 2 different types of solar, rooftop and ground mount, greater resilience. The fact that the projects were located in 2 different locations, 1.5 miles, we very rarely ever get a large enough cloud cover that would cover both of those areas that would affect solar production at the same time. So that's in the design resilience. Future expansion of the project in terms of design. Government of Montserrat policy is to be 100% renewable energy generation by 2030. So in this project, we thought about the future. So we needed a 1.5 megawatt battery inverter. We went for a 2.5 megawatt battery inverter. That means that we can more easily expand the project in the future. The 1 megawatt of battery could easily be housed in a 20-foot container. We opted for a 40-foot container so that when we expand, we actually have housing for it already. So it's that kind of future expansion builds in terms of resiliency. And the last part of resiliency have to do with procurement. So we knew from the very beginning we were dealing with a 1 megawatt solar project, but phase 1 was 250. So in the solicitation document in phase 1, we made it clear that if the successful bidder met certain criteria that were set out, that we would not go back to the market, but would negotiate with them for phase 2. What we got because of that was that the bidder for phase 1 that won the contract never thought of the project as a 250 kilowatt. In their mind, they thought of the project as a 1 megawatt and therefore acted accordingly, built in resilience again. And that's an example of an actual project where we're talking about we have to operate and exist with resilience as a way of life.
Okay. Thank you, Owen. Desmond, I actually want to give you a slightly different question, if that's okay. I love the comment that you made about that sort of a future system really needs to incorporate all the different components of not just energy or not just electricity as we think of it, but the different components of energy. And so I was wondering, from your community, if there's any examples of how you guys have started to really look at that broader systems lens in sort of a future system perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I think, such as my community as it is, we definitely try to keep that connection to our ancestral practices. And a huge part of those ancestral practices is connections to Mother Nature. We honestly believe food sovereignty is a big important aspect of our community. We brought bison home. We're reintroducing the bison as a food sovereignty program. We're actually looking at water protection and ensuring that we have clean water for our community. Those type of energy programs. We're trying to look at carpooling and busing systems for our members, so they don't rely on one vehicle, one person. A lot of those things, that we talk about, that interconnectivity in regards to how we look at energy, but also even what we're cultivating. Definitely we have our solar programs, but we want to expand beyond that. We want to expand to look at other sources that are out there, whether it be wind, whether it be geothermal, whether it be biomass. We're actually looking at developing a hydrogen plant out in the Mamio Beach area, definitely looking at carbon storage, biofuel. There's so much components in regards to how we look and perceive energy right now. When I started doing this work about maybe 6-7 years ago, my main focus was just looking at the renewable sector. But as I dwelled more into it, I came to that realization that everything is interconnected in that understanding, and we got to look at it through that lens, not only just one component of industry or one component of energy cultivation. But just to talk about the word here, resilience here, I think through my perspective as an Indigenous person, when I see these words, resilience and reliability, resilience for myself, it speaks in context to my ancestors and what they went through residential schools, Indian Act, the 60 Scoops. It is their resilience and their ability to survive those atrocities that why I'm here. I'm a product of what they did in regards to their resilience, but also in regards to reliability as an Indigenous person. I think about the reliability and understanding that we have in our connection to the Creator through our practices and ceremonies. So those are two components when I think about that. But when I think about resilience and reliability, I think about a product. If I want a good house, a reliable house, it has to be built resilient. And if I want to buy something that is good product, then it has to be worth buying, something that is built to be resilient. But there seems to be an indifference here based on social class. Because when you go to Dollarama, you can buy the same product over at Canadian Tire, which is about $20 to maybe $30 more, but that product is built to a standard of resilience. Where on the other one is really not. It's kind of a Dollarama kind of product, which goes back to that understanding of social class. We can only afford what we can get. I would love to buy everything that I could that is resilient, that stands the test of time, but at the end of the day, it's based on what is available in my account to afford.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Any questions from the audience? Great.
Hey, this is Keith Cleland with Aukasol Energy. Now, there's some great discussion around resiliency. And when designing grids for resiliency, you talked about several factors like the uncertainty of load growth. Within the global south, obviously, you have to deal with tropical storms, and Indigenous communities, you want to think about resiliency without diesel. Now, as an energy storage provider, I see the value in resiliency, but I'm curious, what is the best way to quantify that value and quantify those benefits of resiliency? Is it economic benefits, or is there a better way? Thank you.
So quantification, I feel like this has been a theme over the last couple of days as well. So who would like to start with that one?
Yeah, I could start a little bit. I think I've got quite a few thoughts. Maybe I'll do like a little bit, and then, and then maybe I'll come back in a bit. But I think an obvious way I think is when we're looking at ancillary services, just making sure that markets, assuming that we're in a jurisdiction with a market, has values on all these attributes we're looking for, especially for energy storage. That's a vital way for us to succeed, is to be able to provide these services, because we know we physically can, but we need to have markets and compensation mechanisms to be able to make a business around meeting those needs. For example, in Alberta, in the past, a lot of our ancillary service need was just bundled in with the energy price, because we just had legacy thermal assets that provided things like spinning reserves and frequency support, inertia by default. But now, as we're moving into a grid where there's more things, and we've disaggregated some of those things from the price of energy, we need to be able to compensate for those. So I guess, in summary, valuing ancillary services and the aspects of resiliency that we're looking to provide.
Desmond?
I think what we're here for, it says a lot in regards to decentralizing energy. When we look at grids, especially within grids that are away from main municipalities, we got to keep in mind that each area is unique to its own. It's unique to in regards to what it can cultivate, whether it can cultivate wind, solar, biomass, or water. Those are, I believe, are important components in regards to how grids can be created. Is not so much in regards to keeping it centralized, but allowing each community or each region to have its own energy, but also, more importantly, have a buy-in. Have the public have that ability to have pride of ownership over some of these projects. It shouldn't just be an industry or government project. People and the public should have that ability to buy stock into these type of programs and projects. Because when you have a local person that buys into something that is done and cultivated locally for them, there's pride of ownership, knowing that they're part of that, and they're part of knowing where that project is moving forward. But at the end, it's based on where it's at, where it's located, and how to accommodate needs and necessities of those people in that area.
Nice. Owen?
Yeah. So value depends on the individual and the grouping. I'm going to give you another example in Montserrat that happened about 8 weeks ago. We went to 10 days of doing load shedding because we didn't have enough generation capacity. And during one of those days, we have one hospital. Montserrat has a population of 4,500 people. We have one hospital. During a power outage, the backup generator, and they have two at the hospital, came on, as usual, and failed. The second one came on and failed. While that was happening, was in the middle of an operation. So someone was on the operating table when the initial outage went and the two generators failed. Very fortunately, that person did not lose their life. But for us as Montserratians, it scared the living daylights out of us, because all of us could imagine, not one, we knew the person because we all know one another, and two, we could imagine it's being us or a member of our family. So the value in terms of resilience all depends on the circumstances and the lens from which you're looking in. It totally changed all of us perspective in terms of supporting microgrids on Montserrat. I could tell you that there were a lot of debates about it and the pros and the cons. After that incident, in terms of microgrids, the support was 90-something%, almost 100. So it all depends on your circumstances.
Okay, so what I'm really hearing there is that for things to be valued in a non-economic way, there has to be some other type of driver that's
Correct.
really going to enable people to look at it from a different lens.
100%.
I feel like that ties in really well with when we think about how we plan our system, or even the models that we use to forecast either load growth, demand growth, and determining the size of generation that's needed. And so I'd be curious from your guys' perspective, when we think about that we are in a transition. We don't actually know if load's going to continue to grow in ways that it's grown in the past, or if it's going to be different forms of load. So, are there examples in ways that people have used different inputs into models that can help enable a more, let's say, a resilient modeling framework in this sort of transition period? Are there examples that you guys are aware of?
I think I can think of, I'm sorry, I was a little too loud, but I think I can think of maybe more negative examples of things where I've seen them maybe be deficient, and not to pick on the ISO too much here, but I think when I've looked at them, some people here are probably familiar with the long-term outlook that the ISO produces, and I think it's led us into some of the issues that we have now, where I think we're seeing kind of congestion and difficulty getting projects connected to the grid in Alberta. And I think even more generally, like I think modeling, it's going to drive planning in all jurisdictions. So I think we really need to be a lot more humble and transparent about the assumptions we're making in these models. And I think providing stronger and probably more exotic bookends to some of these models exercises as well. So for example, just again, focusing on the ISO just because it's where I'm most familiar, I can think of a few years ago in the I think 2021 LTO, like the most extreme climate policy that was contemplated was a $50 per ton carbon price by 2030, which I think is completely inadequate. I don't think that's we know that the scheduled price is going to 170, and that's not even necessarily the most extreme policy that could come to us. Since then, now we're embarking on the clean electricity regulations, which are aimed to get us as close as possible to a net zero grid by 2035. So, I don't think we need to be saying, what is the most likely kind of, climate policy we have. We need to be saying, like, what is the kind of the edge of what we could deal with? And then as well, I think, when we're using the results of these models or communicating them, we need to be straightforward about what are the assumptions. So, for example, in this ISO modeling, air source heat pumps are just assumed to not be a load factor at all in Alberta, just because they were assumed to be not workable in Alberta. So only geothermal or ground source heat pumps are contemplated, which is a big oversight for what could be a potential driver for load. Or similarly, the model just contemplates the current market structure, but we're on an active path right now of reforming the market. So I don't want to put all the responsibility for investigating all these different variables onto the models per se. And I think I'm probably sounding a little jaded about modeling in general, but I think we need to be a lot more honest about what we're dealing with when we're utilizing models, both in engineering practices like system planning, but also when we're communicating with the public as well. And then one aspect I'll maybe just mention quickly, and we'll see maybe if we get back to it, is I think climate modeling, outside of electric system modeling, is going to start to play a much bigger role in our designs. Putting on a hat from a past role I've had as a transmission line design engineer, I think the way we design transmission lines, and I'm sure this is true for a lot of our other infrastructure, is just based on historical weather loads. And we do have safety factors on lots of those that give us some resilience to changes, but we need to be, I think, a lot more honest about what kind of weather loads do we expect to see on these projects in the future, and what assumptions are we making about that. So if we're to try to forecast, for example, ice loading that some of these lines might see, which are if we're forecasting into the future, we're making assumptions about how we're going to address climate change, which is a big assumption. So I think we need to be, again, honest about those, and so we can make those decisions in as sober a state of mind as possible. Thanks.
Okay. One contribution in terms of 5 years ago in the Caribbean, we were doing integrated resource plans. Now they're called integrated resource and resilient plan. And that second R, the major change between the two is the addition of an additional key stakeholder in the University of the West Indies Meteorological Department. They're now a key part and helping in terms of that forecasting in the future. And that has changed the models significantly, much more than a lot of us anticipated going in. So just the addition of adding another key department and listening to them, and they being able to influence the actual models that were there before and change how the models actually behave is significant.
That's a very good question. When I thinking about this question, I was kind of okay. When we talk about grids and how microgrids may look, or how energy is done within communities, we got to look at like I said, as always, a bigger picture. We can do our part in our corner of the earth, in our part of the world, but what's everyone else doing on their part to contribute to this issue of climate change? Climate change is a big issue and concern. We're slowly approaching the 2030 deadlines here, and 2050 pretty soon. And those are things that we got to look in a context at an international community. In my lifetime, I never thought I'd see this happen, but it occurred. During COVID, everything was put to the side. Everything was put to the side to ensure the survival of us as a species. So everything was put on hold. We were all told to be put in isolation. We're all told to take these vaccinations, and it worked, you know. And maybe that's the approach and context we got to look at and how we address climate change. Push all these other things to the side so we can focus on that main understanding that it's our survival that is going to be the issue that is going to be coming up. Not so much climate change, but where do we see ourselves in the future if we don't have a sustainable Earth to live in? Aye, aye.
Interesting. Any other questions? Yep, perfect.
Owen, yesterday you were talking about electric vehicles and bringing in trainers to teach people how to work on them. Can the panel talk about importing subject matter experts to teach about resilience to leave knowledge rather than bringing people in to fix problems that then take the knowledge back with them? Because it seems to be key, and the RMI approach of having experts on islands that are actually residents of the islands promoting projects and teaching people about how things work. But that type of train the trainer scenario and supporting resilience efforts, can you guys comment on those types of things?
So just to give everyone the context, so in 2019, Montserrat didn't have one electric vehicle. And government of Montserrat brought me in to design a program for them. They just wanted an electric vehicle as a demonstration so that people can physically touch it, go and do test rides. And in designing the program, I thought this was a wonderful opportunity. So yes, we bought a Nissan Leaf, but that was just one part of it and ended up being a minor part of the project. So today, since 2019, there is a government subsidy for EVs, plug-in hybrids, and batteries. So the normal duty that you pay to bring a vehicle into Montserrat is about 60% of the cost and freight of the vehicle. For EV, that's zero. For plug-in hybrid EV, it is 20%, and it varies down. We got the government to approve legislation for that kind of subsidy. The other part of the program that we thought, okay, we're going to bring this new technology to the island. What are we going to do about maintaining them and in terms of safety? So we looked at the cost of normally sending 2 or 3 people to the UK or to the US or Canada to do the training. And in the middle of doing that research, I spoke with someone from the Automotive Institute in the UK. And we came up with the idea of them sending out 2 trainers to Montserrat for a month, rather than we sending 2 students to attend the training in the UK. Both costs were more or less the same. But what we got then was that we opened it up to every mechanic on island. 30 showed up for the course. 20 passed the exam and is certified at level 3. In addition to the mechanics, we also had a second program for first responders, fire and police, level 2, where 20 members of our first responders know now how to do that vehicle on island. The great thing about it is that from that program in 2019, today we have 7 EVs and 20-something hybrid EVs in a matter of 5 years, because the infrastructure was put in place. People know I can bring a vehicle because I can get it properly serviced in terms of doing it, and there are subsidies for doing it. So we have to think wider and not just the shiny object, and if we're going to be more resilient.
Desmond, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just in the approach in regards to looking at EVs. You know, in my community, we're just situated off Highway 2, and we're doing project development and commercial development in the area. And one of the things that I wanted to really push on, and within my community, or even people that wanted to help develop, was making sure that we can use this area as a hub for EV and potentially, once it's available, battery exchange programs. We are making that shift also in regards to our community organizations, having that ability to bring charging stations, changing our fleet over to hybrid or battery operated vehicles. But more importantly, in my community, we find it's very important that we have our members be a part of these training and capacity development. When we had solar programs in our community, we had teachers come out, train the individuals in regards to the formula and then the installations. That project evolved. It was taken on by a post-secondary institution in Muskwachees, the Muskwachees Cultural College. They took it a step further. They included other components of the renewable sector, but and followed that same model of teaching the community members to do the installations, to understand the practice, to understand the formula. In the end, we're hoping to have, take it, much further in regards to making sure that we train the trainee. We have somebody that has that ability, that is local, stays local, and has that understanding how to teach these lessons in capacity development and training, whether it be battery storage or EV vehicles or the renewable sector or design and engineering of these type of products. It's a lot of work, and definitely it goes back to that pride of ownership, which I talk about. You're involved in something, and if you're part of something, then you have that understanding that you contributed to that process.
Okay.
And that's how we get sustainability.
Yes, exactly. So like the gentleman flagged, keeping that capacity within the community as opposed to it leaving after project. Okay, so we just have a few minutes. Okay, one quick one.
Okay, I know we're running out of time, so I'll be quick. If resiliency is the ability to persevere through changing and difficult conditions, how do we build our energy systems to adapt to changing technology and the increasingly volatile weather and conditions of climate change?
You each have 30 seconds to answer that.
Yeah, I think it's tricky, as we've discussed about, right? Because I think, the ways that we've tried to adapt our planning practices, from more principle-based to being more dynamic is using modeling. But I think, again, we've got a lot of kinks to work out in that. And I think, to some extent, we need to make decisions that have longer-term consequences now to be able to set ourselves up to have a resilient future. But at the same time, we don't want to be leaving options off the table down the line, especially as we know they're going to materialize. So I don't know if I have the answer, except to just keep this in our minds when we're making these decisions. We want to be building a system that's going to provide what we think we need while still leaving options open to bring in new technologies and new solutions. So thanks for the question, and the fact that I don't quite have the answer means it's a good one.
Yeah, go ahead, Desmond.
Another good question there, but when I look at that, I kind of look at the component and the understanding of any project development needs to have proper reclamation and remediation to have an understanding of the lifespan of this project, how it can be upgraded as technologies changes or how it may have to be replaced. But definitely that component of reclamation and remediation for that project. But even where that project is at the end, take it out of the area, put something new in there. That's my understanding in regards to how reclamation and remediation can be done properly, especially when we address things of that resilience of energy and creating energy programs.
I'll throw my 2 cents in here quickly. So I think, a current system relies on 3 principles: safe, reliable, and in Alberta at least, low cost, but I'd say that's across the board. So in a future system, to keep that resiliency and that nimbleness that's needed, I think it's defining what those future principles need to be. So we're not defining pathways, but principles and then indicators of how we know we're going to work towards and are achieving those principles. So on that note, in 30 seconds or less, I thought it was Loretta made a great comment yesterday about that resiliency is really tied to out-of-the-box thinking. So an example or your biggest concept of what out-of-the-box thinking could be that you want to leave this audience with in 30 seconds.
Sure. So, I think just to spike the football more time, I think, storage is going to be really vital to resilience. But, as we've discussed, we need to be valuing the aspects of resilience and reliability that we need so we can invest in them and we can have businesses provide those solutions. And I think maybe bridging on the out-of-the-box thinking, I think, there's aspects and things that we are going to need in the future that we maybe haven't needed in the past or haven't really considered to need in the past. So, for example, one thing I haven't touched on yet is long duration storage. And I think we really don't have a way in a lot of our traditional thinking of properly compensating the value that we want to see out of long duration. And I think the closest we've seen so far is places like California just doing long duration specific procurements. So I think maybe what I leave with is we really need to be thinking about what are the services we want things to offer, and how can we value those so we can have businesses meet those needs.
Okay, Owen, out of the box thinking.
Whatever it takes for benefit realization. That's it.
Love it. Desmond.
For me, it's, know and understand your treaties. They're a very important component in regards to who we are as Canadians, but also who we are as an Indigenous people. There's so much in there in regards to how we can actually build better relationships and that understanding of treaty. I honestly believe, that's a huge component that is being missed upon, within industry or within government. I always heard this, and this is something I always hear from the chiefs. Treaty trumps Canadian law. Imagine using those treaty rights to your advantage. Aye, aye.
Awesome. Okay, well, with that, I would like you all to help me in thanking the panelists this morning, and I'll pass it back to Brian. Whew. Thank you guys.